1 minute ago, Mariah Carey testifies, Diddy's chilling words leave court in shock. It wasn't a concert, it wasn't a press conference, but when Mariah Carey stepped into the courtroom on that fateful day, the reaction was no less seismic than when she hits her highest note. Headlines didn't just anticipate her entrance, they ignited with it. For years, the case against Sean Diddy Combs had simmered under layers of speculation, whispers and redacted testimony, but nothing prepared the world for what was about to unfold. Her entrance was deliberate, sunglasses on suit, tailored flanked by attorneys like royal guards. The courtroom, already tense from previous testimonies, froze. For a full 5 seconds, not a single keyboard clicked. Even the judge seemed momentarily unmoored. She had nothing to promote, no album in sight, no lawsuit of her own. And that's what made her presence so dangerous. She came only with truth. As she took the stand, the lead prosecutor adjusted her mic and began with a deceptively simple question. Ms. Carey, could you tell the court about your history with Mr. Combs? Mariah didn't flinch. We weren't close, she stated. Just paths that crossed too often to ignore. From the late 90s into the early 2000s, they shared spaces, award shows, parties, studio back halls, not collaborators, not enemies. Just two titans of an industry always orbiting the same rooms. Then came the pivot. She wasn't there to talk about public sightings or mutual acquaintances. She was there because of a single night, July 19, 2003, an industry gathering in the Hamptons, a mansion veiled in luxury guarded by tinted windows and private security, the kind of place where the powerful mingled with the silent. I wanted to leave by 10 p.m., she testified, but he invited me into a side room. He said he needed to clarify something. What followed, according to Mariah, was a moment that haunted her for 20 years. The lights dim, the door closes, velvet chairs, 2 guards posted outside, and Diddy, calm, with a drink in hand, leans in and says, "If they find out what I really do, it's over." She described the statement as emotionless, not a threat, not a joke, a resignation, a moment of internal collapse. When she tried to leave, he stepped in front of the door, and then came another line. "I'll take care of you. Just stay quiet." The courtroom gasped. Jurors leaned in. The silence wasn't just respectful, it was stunned. Mariah walked out that night. Early morning before dawn, she checked out of the estate and returned to Manhattan, shaken but not broken. But when a black envelope arrived at her hotel hours later, its contents cast a deeper shadow, $100,000 in pristine bills and a handwritten note, "Enjoy the evening." She didn't spend it, she didn't acknowledge it, she locked it away. Then weeks later, she mailed it back with only one sentence, "You know where this belongs." The court remained transfixed. This wasn't a tabloid tale, it was testimony under oath, and she wasn't done. Mariah began connecting the dots, memories long buried now, resurrected by the trial. A woman named Lana, a fellow guest at the 2003 retreat, who vanished from the industry weeks later. A voicemail that was erased. A name scrubbed from PR lists. I asked about her, Mariah told the court. They said she'd been erased, like she never existed. A second memory surfaced. 2005, a studio session in Manhattan. Mariah had arrived early only to overhear a conversation behind a thin wall. Diddy speaking to a rising R&B star. "You remember who owns your masters. Don't forget what happened to the last girl." The audience in court shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, even Diddy's defense attorneys paused. The accusations were growing not just in number, but in weight. Mariah spoke calmly, without venom, without embellishment, just fact. And when she finished, she made one thing clear: I stayed silent for too long. But I won't anymore. Not when it matters. The first part of her testimony concluded. Cameras outside the courtroom exploded with flashing lights. Inside, the silence lingered. This wasn't just a celebrity case anymore. It had become a cultural reckoning. And what came next would only deepen the divide, not just between accuser and accused, but between a system built on silence and a voice determined to break it. As court resumed the next day, the air inside the chamber felt heavier, charged with anticipation. Mariah Carey's testimony wasn't just the talk of the courtroom, it had gone global. Hashtags trended across continents. Morning shows dissected every sentence. News tickers quoted her line, "If they find out what I really do, it's over." But this wasn't about virality. Inside that room, it was about credibility, about connection, about consequence. And as the prosecution picked up the thread, they weren't just revisiting one night, they were unraveling a pattern. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Ms. Carey, can you elaborate on how this impacted your professional relationships afterward?" Mariah's gaze didn't waver. Some calls stopped coming, not all just the ones tied to him. Show's private galas label events. Slowly, deliberately, I was uninvited. At first, she chalked it up to chance. Then came the subtle warnings. A label executive called me friendly, even complimentary. He told me I was brilliant, then added, "Just don't bring that night up again. It's not healthy." Her voice, calm but deliberate, carried across the room. Another message came through a mutual acquaintance. "Bad things happen to women who talk too much." She paused. I was disgusted, but I was also aware. That was the industry. You learn early when a warning isn't just a suggestion. It was a survival game of silence, of staying in the right rooms, of being present but not disruptive. But for Mariah, that was no longer an option. The courtroom leaned in again as she recalled an encounter in 2006. Another award show. Diddy across the room, smiling, surrounded by younger artists. Their eyes met. He smiled a different smile, cold, calculated, like a scorekeeper, she said. That's when I knew he remembered, that I had remained quiet, and he was thanking me. Her voice didn't crack, but her words carried weight. She hadn't said anything publicly, but she remembered everything. By now, the jury had seen more than a pop icon. They were seeing a witness who had measured her words, framed them with discipline, but whose story painted a portrait of a culture carefully curated to protect the powerful. Then came the shift. The prosecutor asked, "Did anyone discourage you from testifying?" Mariah exhaled slowly. No one had to. The system was built to do it for them. She shared how she once asked her team to look into an untelevised event Diddy co-sponsored. A former assistant found discrepancies: shell companies, untraceable payments, contracts signed under aliases. When they brought it up to an executive, the response was swift and final. "We don't dig into that, and neither should you." She didn't press further, but she never forgot it. And as the years passed, the warnings sharpened. Whispers about unreleased footage, suggestions of tabloid scandals that could be resurrected. A well-oiled machine of pressure and silence. In 2010, she was asked to present Diddy with a Lifetime Achievement Award. She declined. 3 sponsorships collapsed within a week. No explanation, just silence. Back in the courtroom, the defense objected, calling her testimony speculative. The judge overruled. Not because of what it implied, but because of how often it repeated. Patterns matter, and hers was beginning to sound eerily familiar to others who'd testified before. As the prosecution closed, part 2 of her appearance, they turned back to the theme that began it all: truth. What changed, they asked. Mariah didn't hesitate. "I saw the trial begin. I saw women I didn't even know come forward. I realized the silence wasn't protecting me anymore, it was protecting him." And with that, the room returned to stillness. Not the stillness of disbelief, but of acknowledgement. This wasn't about a single night. It was about a network of complicity. An unspoken understanding that for too long had gone unchallenged. Until now. What followed in part 3 would widen the scope even further, connecting industries, implicating institutions, and forcing even the neutral to choose a side. By the 3rd day, the courtroom had become more than a legal arena. It was a theater of truth, a space where silence, long used as currency, was beginning to lose its value. As Mariah Carey returned to the stand, the atmosphere was taut. No longer was this just a celebrity moment. It was an indictment not just of an individual, but of a system. The prosecutor began with a subtle but powerful query. "Ms. Carey, did you ever believe your silence was being negotiated?" Mariah paused, choosing her words with care. "Yes, many times. Not always with words, sometimes with opportunity, sometimes with money, but always with a condition: don't speak." She recounted the delivery of the black envelope again. Not just the cash, but the note, the driver, the SUV linked to a rental fleet, favored by a certain record label. The suggestion wasn't about bribery, it was about control, about reminding her who held the strings and what might happen if they were tugged. "I never asked for it. I didn't want it. I returned it." But it was clear what it meant. And yet, that wasn't the end of it. The prosecution then introduced a lesser-known but pivotal figure, Lana, a woman barely mentioned in past reports. No artist name, no management history, just a quiet PR associate who had crossed paths with Mariah at that Hamptons party. A woman who, according to Carey, looked uneasy and whispered something about seeing a room she wasn't supposed to. I remember her saying, "There were lights, cameras, and someone signing something." "I left quickly," Mariah said softly. Later that night, Lana was gone. Not from the party, but from the narrative. No one spoke of her, no industry trail, no job changes. Just vanished. Weeks later, a voicemail arrived at Mariah's studio. A woman's voice whispering, "I shouldn't have seen that. No one should talk to me. You should be careful too." It was erased by a studio intern, gone in seconds. But The voice lingered. Mariah didn't confirm it was Lana. She couldn't. But she knew what it felt like to sense danger without seeing it directly. She asked her manager to investigate. The result: she's gone. No postings, no socials. It's like she was wiped clean. The court grew eerily still. Jurors exchanged glances. This was no longer just about misconduct, it was about erasure. As the line between personal testimony and institutional critique blurred, the prosecution shifted again. Were there others? Ms. Carey Mariah nodded. She recounted a scene from 2005 where she overheard Diddy speaking to a young R&B singer in a studio. The artist's name was withheld for privacy, but Mariah verified that the initials and discography matched a once rising star. His tone wasn't loud, she said, but it was loaded. He said, "Act like you've got no options. Remember what happened to the last girl who tried." Mariah never repeated that until now. She was afraid it would be considered hearsay, or worse, brushed off. But then months later, that artist canceled her tour, missed an award show, and never returned to the spotlight. She just disappeared, Mariah whispered. And nobody asked why, because we all already knew. That sentence landed like a verdict. It wasn't proof in the traditional sense. No contracts, no footage, no written threats. But it was a pattern repeated, consistent, undeniable. A pattern not of incident, but of influence. Quiet power exercised in shadows where memory and fear became tools of compliance. And for the first time, even those outside the courtroom began to feel its weight. Social media began to react in new ways. Not just sympathy or admiration, but awakening. Industry insiders shared vague posts. Anonymous tips reached journalists. A movement was starting, not one of outrage, but of disclosure. In this context, Mariah's testimony wasn't just narrative, it was momentum. As the courtroom broke for recess, reporters struggled to keep pace with the story. Editors scrambled, producers held late-night meetings. What had begun as a legal proceeding was now a cultural moment, one that would test not only individuals, but the entire ecosystem surrounding them. What awaited in Part 4 was not merely the fallout, but the fractures, and the institutions that could no longer claim ignorance. The fourth segment of Mariah Carey's testimony was never meant to be the climax, but it became something else entirely the moment the narrative ceased to be about individuals and turned into a reckoning with institutions. As the courtroom reconvened, the tension was different. Less curiosity, more reckoning. Jurors now sat not only as evaluators of guilt, but as witnesses to cultural dissection. Every name, every silent player in Mariah's account became a proxy for something larger. The prosecutor didn't waste time. She pivoted the questions toward the broader network, asking Mariah if she had ever encountered pressure from organizations rather than individuals. Yes, she answered. Many times. Not through direct threats, but through expectations. What you don't say becomes part of the contract. She detailed her attempt in 2008 to investigate an event Diddy had co-sponsored a major production that mysteriously went untelevised. She wanted to understand why. A former assistant dug into it. What she found, Mariah explained, were documents signed under obscure names, companies that didn't exist beyond a few paper trails, invoices with no explanation. The response from above was direct. "We don't dig into that. You shouldn't either." The phrase echoed in the courtroom, like a line from a play, short, sharp, and designed to silence. The prosecution used this moment to pivot toward the tools of modern suppression reputation. Management whispered scandals, digital leverage. Mariah affirmed she'd received implicit warnings over the years. Sometimes it was a resurfaced rumor, sometimes a pulled endorsement. It wasn't punishment, it was a nudge. Stay in line. Be quiet. And yet, even with all this history, it was the year 2010 that crystallized the mechanics of silence for her. "They asked me to present him with a Lifetime Achievement Award," she stated. "I declined, no announcement, just silence." Within a week, 3 separate endorsement deals were quietly withdrawn. No one called, no apologies were made. They simply disappeared. It wasn't coincidence, she said. It was calculation. The defense interjected again, but the judge allowed the testimony. The prosecution was careful, not accusing without evidence, but revealing a pattern. One built not on spectacle, but on sustained quiet control. That's when the courtroom heard the words that had been circling since day one. This wasn't just a man, Mariah said. It was a machine. Her voice remained even, but her statement was unequivocal. The same system that elevated stars also taught them how to maintain control through access, image, and compliance. And those who resisted were often not punished, but forgotten. She didn't say this with bitterness, she said it with clarity. And the jury listened, as she described an executive once telling her, "We all play the game. You don't win if you break the rules." The cultural weight of her testimony deepened. This wasn't just about what happened behind closed doors. It was about the doors themselves and who held the keys. And yet, despite the warnings, despite the cost, Mariah returned to court. She testified not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. The cost of silence, she said, was no longer mine to carry alone. At that moment, the gallery felt it. Something irreversible had occurred. She hadn't just pulled back a curtain, she had torn it off the rails. And as the court prepared to enter the final day of her testimony, the world beyond the walls responded. Industry players began removing photos. Executives went dark on social media. Former collaborators issued vague but meaningful statements of support. Respect, one caption read. Just that. But the meaning was clear. Mariah Carey had not come to rehash the past. She had come to change the present. And as Part 5 would soon show, she may have succeeded. The final day of Mariah Carey's testimony arrived not with chaos, but with quiet resolve. No longer was the world asking if she would speak the truth. The question now was, what would be done with it? Inside the courtroom, all eyes were locked on her, not with spectacle but with respect. The woman who had once stood silent at award shows now stood as a witness to something larger than herself. The prosecutor approached with care. Ms. Carey, after all these years, why now? Her answer came with the weight of decades behind it. Because I saw what happened when others started to speak. And I knew the silence I carried was protecting someone who didn't deserve it. But her voice wasn't one of vengeance. It was clarity measured, grounded. This wasn't about a headline. It was about history. As the courtroom leaned in, the prosecution asked one final question. Did you hear Mr. Combs threaten anyone else directly? Mariah exhaled slowly. Yes. Once. And I've never spoken of it until now. What followed was one of the most gripping revelations of the entire case. In 2005, she had visited a Manhattan studio to meet a producer. She arrived early. From a partitioned wall, she heard Diddy speaking to a young R&B singer, one known for her gospel roots. A voice that once soared across charts. You remember who gave you those records, Diddy reportedly said. Act like you have no constraints. There are rules here. Then came the chilling line. If you think you can walk away, remember what happened to the last girl who tried. Mariah didn't see who he was talking to. She never repeated it. Until now. Months later, that singer vanished from the public eye. No tour, no award shows, no explanation, she told the jury, and no one asked because everyone knew. The room sat still. Even Diddy's expression, unreadable, didn't move. Her testimony by then had evolved. It was no longer just about what was said in private or done behind velvet curtains. It had become a declaration of the systems that sustained silence and the cultural costs of complicity. Mariah wasn't testifying for revenge. She was testifying for memory for those who couldn't speak or were erased before they could. For Lana, for the unnamed, for every artist who was never asked to testify. The prosecutor asked if she had any closing words. I am not here to rehash suffering, she said. I'm here to ensure that what we buried no longer gets rewarded. And with that, her testimony ended. She stepped down. No wave, no grand exit, just presence. Outside the courthouse, the ripple effects had already begun. Major news networks aired her statement in full. Documentaries were announced. Op-eds published by artists, executives, even former silence holders, each echoing a singular point. This wasn't just a trial. It was the end of immunity. Hashtags like "Want Truth In," the industry, and "The Curtain Falls" began trending. Some used her quote as a rallying cry. If they find out what I really do, it's over. Others began to speak. Two former executives of Bad Boy Entertainment reportedly agreed to testify under seal. One ex-staffer posted cryptically, "Some people silenced me, others paid me." Mariah had become the spark. Not because of fame, but because she asked for nothing in return. No new album, no endorsement, no PR campaign, just truth. The defense attempted damage control. They tried painting her as dramatic, but the jury had already seen the difference between performance and testimony. And when one juror was later asked what stood out most, their answer was simple. When she looked at him, it was like she was finally free, and he knew it. That moment marked the shift. This wasn't a scandal, it was a collapse. Not of a man, but of a system. Mariah Carey hadn't just testified, she had changed the temperature of the room, the tone of the culture, and the definition of silence. And now the industry had a choice: follow the echo or remain a shadow.